Hey,
Hi,
we got you here, man.
glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate you taking time today. I think we've been chatting back and forth quite a bit. Let me introduce you first. So, David Z. Morris is a journalist, fraud investigator, and author of the forthcoming book, Stealing the Future, known for exposing billion-dollar scams from FTX to Nikola. Geez, man, you're out here in the trenches going after the big boys. You're also currently covering the Roman storm trial from the founder of Tornado Cash. We've been talking this last week. I've been eager to
Mhm,
get you on, but you've been in the courtroom, sort of at the whim of the legal
mhm.
process and the crazy timelines there. I think there's probably a number of people listening to the show that uh, have a fairly limited understanding of what's going on here. Maybe the big news of a bunch of the charges were dropped, sort of swayed some interest in it. But there's a very real trial going on right now, and I'm wondering if you can catch us up on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll start by like clearing that up. Like the charge, no charges have been dropped,
Hmm.
and that's part of the complexity and weirdness of this case, which is what you're referring to. I'm pretty sure is the dropping of OFAC sanctions against the contracts themselves, which is a little bit different, unfortunately, than the dropping of criminal charges against its founders. Just for people who might have no idea what's going on, Tornado Cash is a privacy protocol. Basically, it allows you on Ethereum to disconnect one wallet from a fresh wallet in the sort of chain of custody that allows you to be identified on chain. And it's still up and running. It's a decentralized protocol that does not require its creators to still be actively involved. But the three co-founders, Alexei Pertsev, Roman Simonov, and Roman Storm, have all been in various ways charged with money laundering and associated crimes. And basically, the broad arc of the trial is the prosecutors, the U.S. attorneys, trying to get across that the creation of Tornado Cash was conceived substantially for criminal purposes, while the defense is trying to show that there's sort of a need for privacy on chain that was mainly motivated by, I mean, not exactly, not even altruistic, but just um, real utilitarian motives towards something that people needed, not for criminal purposes. And so we have things like Vitalik Buterin telling Roman and others that privacy was really important. Andreessen Horowitz did not invest in PepperSec, the parent company, but did sort of say that it's a good idea. We just have like a few concerns, and we're looking forward to seeing what you do. So there's a lot of evidence for kind of community support for the project that is, I think, going to play a major role as the jury considers their verdict, which they're basically doing. They finished on Thursday. They have Friday off, and then Monday they go back into deliberations to decide the verdict.
I know there's been, the trials seem to have a bunch of probably very boring moments and then some very exciting moments. It sounds like there was some pretty big debate around some of the evidence being introduced earlier this week around, I guess, some specific claimants and whether or not their money was, I guess, they were susceptible to a scam in some way, and then some money was moved through Tornado Cash, and also a number
Mm-hmm.
of centralized exchanges. I'm curious if you can maybe dive into some of like the more notable or intriguing components of this case so far.
It's really been one thing after another in terms of procedural fights over evidence, which is to say, what gets admitted, what witnesses can say on the stand, and what is kind of accepted as fact for the underlying case that they're making. Probably the most contentious element of the case, and one that, frankly, I think is ripe for appeal potentially if there's a guilty verdict here. The very first witness in the case was a victim of a sort of romance slash investment pig butchering scam, and she testified to having hired a recovery and tracing firm called Payback to try and figure out. It's a very sad story, and you can understand why the prosecution wanted to put her on the stand. She's a Taiwanese American immigrant who works as a court translator, and had her like $190,000 life savings stolen, along with $50,000 belonging to her sister. she hired this recovery firm called Payback, which told her in an email, like a letter that they sent her, that she should contact Coinbase, FTX, Kraken, and Tornado Cash, because according to them, that was where her stolen funds were sent. It was through this scam called NTU Capital that it's been actually under investigation by the FBI, and it turns out, however, that Payback is also under investigation by the FBI because it's a scam recovery service. This sort of came to a head, and this was sort of the prosecution's main grounding for having this witness on the stand. Very soon after she testified, not only was that sort of publicized, but Paul Graywall, the legal head at Coinbase, said, we've looked at this. These are traceable because she was scammed by depositing crypto into a scam wallet for a scam investment site. And so it's traceable. And Graywall said, we can't find any indication that any of this money went to Coinbase. So it looks like the entire trace that this Payback firm supposedly did was just fake and made up. And then further, the prosecution had one tracing witness originally, an FBI agent named DeCapua, who seemed very competent, but he only traced the funds being sent from major hacks like Ronin and Bitmart to Tornado Cash. It came out in cross-examination he had not traced the funds from Katie Lynn to Tornado Cash, supposedly. So essentially at the last second in the trial, the prosecution said, okay, we're going to have this next witness, an IRS accountant, who basically was originally tasked only with tracking the cash outs of Torn tokens. So the founders, like in many projects, had a grant of Torn tokens, 30% of the total that they sold at a certain point, and it was admittedly it was sort of after these sanctions came down in mid to late 2022. I don't have the timeline exactly in my head right now, but this IRS agent was originally supposed to trace these sales of Torn tokens. He was then tasked with tracing, in addition, Katie Lynn's funds, and used a method called first in, first out to supposedly trace these funds. However, this is an accounting method that has very limited applications in tracing anonymous transactions, especially on the blockchain, because there is no way of sort of establishing a chain of ownership through unidentified wallets. And so for sort of complicated, somewhat technical reasons, under cross-examination, this IRS agent admitted that his method of tracing could not prove that the fraudsters who sold Katie Lynn's money actually put it all the way through to Tornado Cash, because he was tracing this long chain. And at the end, even he only claimed that about 9 ETH worth of Katie Lynn's money, so $30,000 or $40,000 out of $250,000 stolen, went to Tornado Cash. But he admitted under oath that his method could not prove that the hackers had actually done that. That, for example, it was possible somebody had taken those funds and spent them on something, and then the recipient was the one who actually ultimately put it through Tornado Cash. So, what it works out to is there is no clear foundation for this very first emotionally impactful witness who testified to her money having gone through Tornado Cash. There's no clear reason that she has anything to do with this case whatsoever. And so that's just one of a few similar things that have happened in the case where the evidence that the prosecution is bringing, there is very good reason to question its validity on a foundational level.
Man, I mean, I just so appreciative of the work you're doing here. I think you have a number of tweet threads that and your work at The Rage goes into this and
Thank
more.
you.
So if you found this sort of conversation here at all interesting, like it has been a true crime drama living out in and there's such I think I feel so awful for all the people who have suffered from these types of hacks. And I think obviously you've done a ton
Yeah.
of work
Yeah.
in this space. Generally, it's never a positive thing, especially if the technology I think we're also excited about also has these really unintended consequences and a big impact. So the Rage has a
Yeah.
wonderful set of your reporting, and I think you've done a bunch of videos on it as well. But maybe before we let you go, what do we have to look forward to next week? What should we be following, and when might we ultimately know when a verdict is?
Yeah. Well, let me just very quickly also set the table for the larger stakes here, because the reason this matters so much, and the reason I wish there was more attention on it, and why I really appreciate you guys bringing me on here, is that what's happening to Roman is, like, arguably, and there are nuances to the case, and do please read our work and catch up on it, but The precedent being set here could ultimately be used to prosecute open source software developers for the use of their tools. This is basically what it's about: is if you are building a tool that is useful among other things for nefarious ends, are you then liable for the bad actors who do bad things with something you built? And the essence of what's going on is that Roman Storm is being held responsible in the same way that, to take a very real world example, gun manufacturers are not held legally liable for acts committed with their products. And so that's the significance here. That's in a nutshell the larger stakes. This is not just about like one guy. It's very much about
Well,
this
and
entire
Facebook and
space.
Twitter aren't held liable
Um,
for the messages being sent to the links that ultimately send people out, right?
on
Yeah, or WhatsApp.
WhatsApp
Yeah.
or other, encrypted. Yeah, exactly. And the defense has really set those stakes out. It's not necessarily what's being tried at the trial, and so that's why we're looking towards potential appeals. However, that being said, there may not be any need for appeal because we did have a full day of jury deliberation on Thursday. They went in first thing in the morning and stayed until 3 p.m. And then they're going to come back on Monday and keep deliberating. And basically what that lengthy deliberation suggests is just that they're taking it seriously. They're really thinking about these issues, and that they didn't just see an open and shut guilty criminal case. And my reading, I am not a lawyer, but I've done a few of these trials and I've really thought about these things. And I think that, and this is based on talking to other people too, the fact that we have this lengthy deliberation does lean in sort of Roman's favor because, frankly, just looking at the way the cases have been put forward, there are a lot of holes in the prosecution's case, a lot of places where reasonable doubt can come in. And specifically, there's no really solid indication, although there are some unfortunate messages and things like that. So, there's a lot to learn here about being cautious with your private communications. But, the preponderance of evidence, in my opinion, at this point, um, there's just not a lot of evidence that Roman Storm set out to create a money laundering machine so that hackers could get away with giant crimes. That was not his intent here. And so the fact that they're really thinking about it, I think bodes well for some important precedent to be set here. I would say we are probably going to have a verdict by early afternoon Monday, but I totally could be wrong. The thing is, this is very complicated, and these jurors are laymen, so they're taking it serious and they're thinking it through. But there's a lot for them to think through. But we will be, obviously reporting that news as soon as it comes out. You follow at the Rage Tech on Twitter, and I'm at David Z Morris. And those are both the best places to keep an eye out. And there are a few other crypto journalists covering this, but they will be there on Monday, I'm sure. So there's luckily some good coverage right now. But in general, the coverage has been pretty scant. So you'll get it from us perhaps first.
Well, David, appreciate your work. Thanks for making some time with us today, and I guess we'll look forward to next week.
Great. And thank you guys again for
Yeah, thanks
having
for
me
coming
on.
on.
Really
Our
means
pleasure.
means a lot.